Hello, everyone. Welcome back to a very special episode of Uncanny Treks. It's Liberation Day for Uncanny Treks, Matt. We are liberated from looking at Hush stories, but only for a few weeks because we'll be back to Hush soon enough. But on this Liberation Day, we are looking at Batman Detective Comics by Paul Dini and several artists. We are looking at issues 821 through, was it 826, Matt?
I believe so, yes.
I am Bob in Cascadia. That is Matt in the Southland. Matt, are you feeling free on this, our Liberation Day?
I'm feeling so much better, Bob, not having to read anything about Hush for a little while. We will eventually hit Heart of Hush. That's a little further down the way.
And then maybe some Streets of Gotham.
Streets of Fire.
Like America's Liberation Day, our liberation might be short-lived, but nonetheless, maybe for 3 weeks, we're free of Hush. We're talking about these 3 standalone issues. This is the Paul Dini run that's right after Infinite Crisis, right after 1 year later, launches the same time as the much more famous, and I gotta say vastly superior Grant Morrison Batman run. But I was reading both of these runs when they started, both the Dini and the Morrison run. I really liked both. I still mostly like this. It's not as good as it was in my memory, but it's still pretty good. I was pleased to revisit it. How did you feel about it, Matt?
I really like Paul Dini, and we know him from Batman the Animated Series fame. Wrote some fantastic episodes for that show. And when you read these issues individually, at the very end of the issue, all I can think about is the outro to Batman the Animated Series playing in my head. Kevin Conroy giving a quip and then going to that outro, the Animaniacs banner at the bottom of the screen flashing across, coming up next.
Very fair. I do think we should make clear Batman the Animated Series, much better than this. I like these comics, but you don't want to hype it up too much, maybe, as Batman the Animated Series in comics form, because it's not really that. If you want that, you should go to the Batman Adventures series from the 90s, which is excellent. Some of my very favorite Batman comics. But this is really interesting, and there's a lot of similarity of voice and tone and one-off focus of issues. You're definitely right to make the connection. I just want to caution listeners, if they've never read the stuff, to not build it too much.
It's not Batman the Animated Series. It's not at that level, but it is the same writer, and you will hear some of the same voices.
I can't even really speak for the issues next week because I don't remember them that well. But I only had this collection and the next collection of issues for complicated reasons. Actually, not that complicated, but for reasons I stopped reading the series. I might explain that when we get actually to the later issues, why I stopped.
Was it money, Bob?
Only indirectly.
This was around 2006.
Yeah, 2006. Let's just plunge right in. Our first issue is number 821, Beautiful People. And this is the only art in the run, I think, by J.H. Williams, but it is the great artist J.H. Williams III doing the art. So I would say this is starting off with a bang. Also, maybe starting off a little too good because the run is never going to look this good again, I think. But we got J.H. Williams III on art. Matt, do you have any favorite work by J.H. Williams?
No, Bob, help me out here. How do I know him?
Know him from the Batwoman run later in Detective Comics, a couple years later with Greg Rucka writing it.
That's good stuff.
I really love that Batwoman run. He also did the character Chase. I really like his run on Chase in the 90s. I am fond of his series with Alan Moore, Promethea, which is sort of Wonder Woman, but way more magic-y. At the end of that series, it just turns into Alan Moore lecturing the reader on magic as illustrated by J.H. Williams III. And I gotta say, it's gorgeous. I don't necessarily think you would dig that series, Matt, but it's gorgeous. It's beautiful. I love it.
When you said magic, I just lost all interest.
If there are any of our listeners who don't cringe and wince at the term magic, they should check out Promethea by Moore and Williams if they have not already. And then one other little bit of trivia about J.H. Williams III, Matt. Do you know who his great uncle is?
No, Bob?
Hank Williams, the country singer, Matt.
Oh, wow.
Yep,
Wow.
yep. Small world. I was trying to find out more info about that, but I didn't find out much. But two great artists related, so I just thought I would throw out that trivia. So, Matt, what goes down in issue 821, Beautiful People?
So Batman is introduced to a new villain, Bob. Facade.
That's another thing you got to give Dini credit for in this run, is he does try to introduce some new villains. I don't think Facade's much of a hit, but I appreciate the attempt. This did trigger me a little bit, Matt. So as we discussed in the Devin Grayson Gotham Knights run, I do like Batman using his Bruce Wayne connections to hunt out rich people doing crime. But this was kind of a theme in these issues of Batman going out of his way to protect rich people from criminals. Can't say I love that. I would rather him not be so concerned with the 1%.
You don't have Paul Dini money, Bob. That's your problem.
I don't have Paul Dini money. I'm pretty sure Paul Dini don't have Bruce Wayne money, though. I'm pretty sure if Paul Dini thought about it, he'd find that he's got more in common with me than he does with Bruce Wayne.
Paul Dini came into a whole lot of money after all his writing in Batman the Animated Series and Justice League and all that good stuff.
Paul Dini is probably a millionaire, Matt, but he ain't a billionaire.
He's writing issues to make sure that he knows that the Batman's protecting the rich people too. They're not all bad. What he's trying to say.
Well, Matt, what did you think of the opening?
Oh, Bob, this comic goes really hard in the beginning because Batman lets a dude get hit by a train. And it bothered me because he just glances over it, skims right by it. Dude ran in front of a train. The dude Batman was just fighting. You see Batman's hand outstretched, but Batman never goes back and says anything about it.
That is another difference between this and Batman the Animated Series. A lot of similar tone. But since this is a comic book, it can be much darker, much more sexual, much more violent, much more, quote, adult than Batman the Animated Series ever could be. You got to hit on something there that does also somewhat mark a difference between this and Dini's work on the animated series.
Bruce Wayne would have been a little more, I shouldn't let that dude run in front of a train.
Life's hard out there, man. On page 8, we're introduced to a phrase. I think this is where we're introduced to it. They call the supervillains of Gotham gimmick crooks. Do you have any strong feelings on that phrase, gimmick crooks?
What are other terms they've used in the past? They call the heroes masks.
I want to say in Long Halloween, they call them like either costumes or psychos.
It gives them a more clinical feel to it, even though it's not a nice name.
It has an interesting thing of it's evocative, but it's also diminutive.
It's not very nice but at the same time, it gives them a reason or a column to put in the spreadsheet. These are your mafioso.
He's a real lunch pail, 9 to 5 criminal. He's a blue collar criminal. So, Matt, another question about language. We might have had this philosophical debate a long time ago, but it's a debate I like to return to now and then. It's something I think about too much. So, the word fiend. Obviously, the word fiend has some negative connotations to it. If you're fiending for something or somebody calls you a fiend for something, they're saying you're an addict, they're saying you're a junkie. But is it just me, or if you're calling somebody a dope fiend, that still has a bit more positive of a connotation than saying you're a junkie or a crackhead or an addict? Because to me, there is a connotation of addiction to fiend, but there also is a connotation of skill. If you're a card fiend, you're addicted to gambling, but you're also probably pretty good at it.
This is where my wrestling brain comes in, Bob, because I'm thinking of Bray Wyatt's character, rest in peace, Bray Wyatt, the Fiend. He's a menace, Bob, but he also has skill.
Another definition of fiend that is more just devil or menace or enemy. Batman yelling at Joker in the 60s, Joker, you fiend.
Right.
Maybe the Bray Wyatt character was more in that pure villain rather than a skillful addict category, but maybe I'm wrong. But Bray Wyatt, one of the greats.
All right.
Another question that came up on this page. Do you remember who the Great White Shark is? He gets name dropped on page 8 in issue 521.
He does, Bob. And I do remember him from Arkham Asylum Living Hell. I owned all of those issues. I thought that was a really fun story at the time. I have not gone back to reread it for nostalgia purposes.
Yeah, I first read that because you gave it to me. I forgot that. But yeah, I read it in singles because you loaned it to me.
One problem I do have, Bob, with this panel that you're talking about where they have all the different criminals is that they call out criminals that aren't actually in the image. And that makes me so angry. If you're going to say Great White Shark and then not have him in the image, because it's right next to Black Mask. My brain is thinking they got Black Mask mixed up with Great White Shark. But no, then I see Mad Hatter and they didn't mention him.
Well, Matt, you notice another contradiction on page 11.
Yeah, on page 11, Bob, we do have some issues where this is actually one of my favorite panels. We have Bruce Wayne going to an art gallery. And this is the second or third time we've seen Bruce dislike modern art, but he also dislikes gypsies as well. So we're learning a lot about Bruce's likes and dislikes.
Matt's harkening back to our episode a few episodes ago on the Devin Grayson Gotham Knights run, where we see Batman be racist. We get the sense that Batman doesn't like modern art there, and certainly in other stories. But we also do learn in that collection, in fairness, Batman funds a lot of modern art as Bruce Wayne.
Yeah, and if I'm not mistaken, didn't Batman get all of his ideas to make all the Batmobiles look like penises from modern art and stuff?
Forgotten that, but that sounds right. I can't remember where that.
He's, oh, look at that car. It looks like a big bat. I'll make my car look like that.
Well, Matt, speaking of inspiration and wall hanging art and mask and all of this jazz, I'm going to go for my favorite panel near the end of the issue on 22. You see Tim put the broken facade mask on a Batcave trophy wall. And you also see mask of Harley Quinn, Bane, Scarecrow, Riddler, Firefly. You also see Mad Hatter's hat. And I just thought that was a very cool image. It's a little weird and chilling, but visually cool of Batman having a big game trophy wall of the heads of his enemies, right? That's pretty funny.
Very Craven the Hunter.
Totally right. That's Sergei Kravinoff behavior right there.
But you ever wonder how like pivotal those masks are to like the evidence in court cases, and Batman just got them on his wall, like down in his
Well, Matt,
cave?
I would say in year 1, you'd probably be absolutely right. By year 10 or year 15, whatever this is, probably Gotham courts treat, gimmick criminals like courts in the Washington state treat DUIs. It's just a system. They're just running you through it. They
Uh,
got it down to a science. Arguably, maybe they're going too fast with it and they're breaking some civil rights.
we got to pump out all those Batman comics.
About all those convictions for people captured in Batman comics. So,
So
Matt, you did have a problem with it. Maybe
it,
not with how J.H. Williams
it,
draws
it
Tim Drake's
it's not
costume, but maybe the costume itself.
it's not the artist's fault here, but man, I just want to say that this issue, going back to this 1 year later, this is the worst Drake costume. I hate it. It's like the costume he had in the New Adventures of Batman and the animated series.
Oh, yeah.
It,
There's a
it
thing about the color scheme of that, but I can't
it's
express it. And
it literally looks to me like PJs. It looked like he's wearing little kid pajamas. But what the problem too is it looks better on the animated series version because Tim's smaller. He's drawn like a kid. Whereas
yeah.
here he's drawn as like a teenager still.
As I remember, the coloring is a lot brighter in the New Adventures, whereas here, both Williams's art and the particular coloring choices are rather more muted, and I don't think it comes across very well.
It doesn't. It's ugly. Okay, this is the ugliest Tim Drake outfit by a long shot.
Oh, no, no, no. Hard disagree, man. That's why I was going to offer a friendly counter argument, but now I'm going to make it more intense.
I always appreciated the Red Robin outfit because it was introduced in Kingdom Come, the Michael Keaton Batman look. So I've always been okay with it. Even though
Yeah, I guess we just disagree. The
well,
worst.
well, you hate Kingdom Come, so whatever.
It's true.
Yeah.
But even setting that aside, because shortly after this, Robin's going to become Red Robin, right? And have an ongoing Red Robin series for about 20 issues.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
God.
There is one outfit he wears as Red Robin that I never liked much. When he actually looks like a bird, he looks like he has feathers.
Yeah.
It's almost a Black Hulk looking thing.
Red Robin is the worst Tim Drake costume, but I don't think it's the worst Robin costume. To give you a little sop to that, I will say if you think about the adult Robin Earth 2 costume from the 70s and the
Oh,
early
with
80s.
the yellow, yeah, it's the product of its time. I'll live with that.
True, true.
This just looks stupid. There have been better designs for him, way better designs for Tim Drake at this point.
Fair, fair. Matt, you wanted to debut a new segment for our...
Yeah, I did, because as we finish comics, I want to point out whether or not Alfred was in the comic book. Because remember, you had mentioned in one of our previous episodes that you didn't need Alfred to have a good Batman story, but
No.
I just want to show you the good Batman stories that have Alfred, and maybe we'll start to see that some of the ones that aren't good don't have Alfred. But so far, we've got a story with Alfred in it. It's been pretty good.
You say pretty good. I would say this issue pretty mid, I would say. I wouldn't necessarily say good.
I liked it. I thought it was good.
I will
enjoyed
say,
it.
as much as I like the Williams art, when I read this one, I didn't hate it, but my nostalgia was maybe stronger than my memory on this one.
The idea is a little silly in the grand scheme of things, but it's very Batman. If you just want
No,
to
that's
one-off
true.
in Batman's world,
And
That's-
God knows I missed that.
that's what I think I liked so much. I think that's why I'm enjoying this so much.
I'm glad that you're maybe even liking it slightly more than me, because I was feeling a little guilty. I'm just gonna force Matt to revisit my nostalgia under the
No.
guise of a Hush run.
No, I don't mind it. It's just something I don't think I've ever seen these before.
Nice. Well, moving on to the next issue, it's number 822, Enigma, Consulting Detective. And I was just going to note that Don Kramer's the artist for this and several of the later issues. I don't know Kramer's art real well, but he was also doing a lot of JSA art in the early and mid aughts. So that's the other thing I associate him with in my mind is JSA and Batman. And then I also wanted to ask, kind of pursuant to the title of this issue, Matt, do you know where the phrase consulting detective comes from?
It comes with Sherlock Holmes, right?
For whatever reason, that phrase just, when I was a kid reading the Sherlock Holmes stories, it really stuck to me because early in the Sherlock Holmes stories, I think probably in Study in Scarlet, the first novel, he has a whole lecture to Watson about how he's not a private eye or private detective. He's a consulting detective, and that's different. And that's a very common gimmick I was noticing even then as a 10-year-old reading mysteries. Every private detective always has a theory about how they're not like all the other private detectives.
Yeah. He's a consulting detective. He just works with the police department. Doesn't go out on his own.
Exactly.
Bob,
One thing I also appreciated later as I started reading some books that talked about the history of detectives is that before Sherlock Holmes, detective was a profession, but it was not really looked upon very highly. It was thought of as similar to being a spy or an informant. So, because of the role of private detective agencies and doing things like servicing rich people's needs and breaking labor strikes, it was a really unflattering thing to be. As much as I love the Sherlock Holmes stories, they are in one way a propaganda effort to rebrand detectives in a more positive light.
I've never seen it framed that way. That's fun. I wouldn't want a detective snooping around me because it would bother me, but then I enjoy reading detective stories. So
Yeah,
I
and
think
I
most
guess in
people would
fairness,
hate to have a detective after them.
I might be overstating that. I'm not as sure what the associations with detectives were in England, but in the US, that was definitely true. Like Catherine Nickerson's book about detectives is really good at talking about that. And she doesn't get into the Holmes thing, but the Holmes stories were real popular in America and did somewhat have that effect in America, at least.
Like how Dog the Bounty Hunter rebranded Bounty Hunter.
Oh man, Sherlock Holmes, the dog, the bounty hunter of the Victorian age. Although, could you
We
imagine if Dog the Bounty Hunter got big in England?
let's get into the
All
story.
right.
In the Enigma consulting detective, Edward Nigma is hired to aid in a murder investigation to which Batman upstages him.
I want to talk about our Enigma in a minute, Matt, but I begin by asking, we have Roxy Rocket as the opening villain, the first couple pages villain in this comic. And do you have any hot takes on her?
Not really. I mean, she's over sexualized for my taste every appearance she makes. So I'm just whatever. But is she a Paul Dini thing?
Yeah, maybe not Paul Dini, but at least a creation for Batman the Animated Series. In that sense, she is a Paul Dini female character, so she's going to be a little bit oversexed. That's
Right,
just
of course.
how he rolls. Although I've always found her maybe mildly interesting because Batman the Animated Series and also Superman the Animated Series is so famous for the women all being very distinctive looking, yet in a uniform type. Lois Lane, Harley Quinn, Poison Ivy, Catwoman, Aunt Zatanna. Roxy Rocket is one of those, but she's the least successful of them. I don't have anything really intelligent to say about her. I've just always found it interesting that she's the least successful Deanie Babe from Batman the Animated Series.
Even Livewire took off where she did.
You're right. I forgot about Livewire. Red Claw. Although I think Red Claw did star in a
Oh,
two-parter, which I don't think Roxy Rocket ever did.
dang. I forgot about Red Claw.
You remember who voiced Red Claw?
I don't remember.
Catherine Mulgrew.
Star Trek Voyager fame. Wow. At least we remember Roxy Rocket. At least you do.
Well,
Just-
I remember Red Claw, but that's only because I think that two-parter with Catwoman was the first Batman the Animated Series I saw.
wow. What a horrible introduction to Batman animated series.
I still like it, but I mean,
Glad
you
it
know,
stuck.
I was not, shall we say, the sharpest kid.
You're,
So
you're not the connoisseur of animation that you are now.
I'm not really a connoisseur of animation now either.
Speaking of being a connoisseur of anything, I'm going to talk about my favorite panel is on page 26, and it's where Bruce Wayne treats Enigma like he's a trick-or-treater. This is where we're talking a little bit about, you can hear the animated series voice of Kevin Conroy here and his Bruce Wayne. Paul Dini's Bruce Wayne is somewhat distinctive, and it was partially his writing and then also Conroy's voice. This scene is where it's at. This is where I was, oh, this is just something I would see in the animated series. Also, Alfred's there. I just want to make sure you knew that.
We got an Alfred count of 2, huh?
Yes, we're at 2 Alfreds.
2 Alfreds. He's right, though, about the Kevin Conroy style voice of Paul Dini's Batman in these issues, and I presume the future issues of the run, too. My favorite panel was on 35, and I should just say, listeners, we're working off a fan-made Paul Dini omnibus. But in 35, we have 3 panels of the Riddler riding shotgun with Batman and the Batmobile, and that just cracked me up. I thought it was really
Yeah.
funny.
And it's so strange too, Bob, that we've seen in Gotham Knights, Bane and Batman in the Batmobile. Here we've seen Riddler and Batman in the Batmobile. And then for all the players of the Arkham games, you remember that opens with Batman and Joker riding in the Batmobile.
Interesting. Well, and also, I don't think we actually see panels of it, but Batman definitely doses Ivy and then drives her to the Batcave in a coming issue of this we're going to talk about today. And then there's also a lot of visual imagery in the last issue we're going to talk of Tim Drake Robin and Joker in a car together. So that
Oh
really does
yeah,
seem to be the motif of this. Well, I guess you're making the good point though that it's a larger thing too, but it's certainly a motif
oh
of
yeah.
this set of issues.
I was saying Batman likes to drive around his villains in the passenger seat. And they fixed this in Arkham Knight, though, the video game where Batman puts their
Mm.
asses in the trunk. It's no joke. It's comfortable back there. They have a seat, but he doesn't want them sitting next to him while he's trying to drive.
Oh man, that's funny. That makes Batman sound straight up like a serial killer. Do you remember the amazing Quentin Tarantino film Jackie Brown?
Oh, yeah.
Do you remember that part where Samuel L. Jackson tricks his friend? I want to say his name is Marvin, but I think that might be the character from Pulp Fiction. But Sam
It is,
Jackson
yeah.
tricks Marvin into getting into the trunk and then like drives half a block, gets out and shoots him in the trunk.
Yeah, I do remember
Yeah,
that.
it just makes me think Batman is Sam Jackson in Jackie Brown, although presumably he's not saying the N word as often as
Yeah,
Sam.
there's none of that. It doesn't have Hulk Hogan in it.
Doesn't have Hulk Hogan in it. Matt, another thing we learned specifically about the Riddlers, Query and Echo used to work at a fetish club before they were women, for which that's maybe the kind of detail you can leave out.
And we don't need all that. And I mean, we get like 3 whole pages of like Riddler taking Batman down into this, like it's called Pandora's or something, the club.
Yeah.
Uh,
Paul Dini, like a lot of comics writers, does have his fixations, Matt.
they're easily identifiable in their works of art.
Do you any strong takes on Query and Echo?
And
I
I'm always,
really like them. I don't think it would work for the way they do in Batman the Animated Series, but I always a little regretted that we didn't have Query and Echo in the Timverse animated
okay,
series.
let me ask you this though. Are Query and Echo, this might be the wrong word, are they not like basically analogs to some degree of Sugar and Spice in Batman Forever?
I think they're both meant to be analogs of the role of the villain's girlfriend in Batman the 60s show.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
And then correct me if I'm wrong, and I mean, it's still a very fair comparison to make, but Sugar and Spice are actually Two-Face's girls.
No, they are.
Yeah,
That's what I'm
okay.
saying. But if you remember, it was weird for Harvey Dent to have, in my opinion, it was weird for him to have 2 female henchwomen when the whole Gilda Dent piece that's involved with them. We
Yeah.
had the TAS episode.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Isn't she just a girlfriend in that? Or am I?
Well,
I know. Her name's not Gilda. I want to say maybe that was the name introduced in Long Halloween.
Oh,
I feel like her name is something else in the animated series.
Grace Lamont, Bob. That's the name of the character in Batman the Animated Series.
Now that you say Grace, that sounds familiar, but I would not have thought Lamont in a million years.
Nah, that's crazy. For some reason, my mind did one of those like Mandela effects that just made it always be Gilda.
In fairness to your earlier question about Query and Echo, Matt, I mostly just remember seeing them in the background of Chuck Dixon comics. I want to say Dixon created them in the early 90s. In a way, I more just like the idea of them than I even know them themselves.
There's an additional piece to the Riddler.
Of all of the big villains, Riddler having female sidekicks makes the most sense. Although Harley Quinn and Punchline are great, although they both evolved to be a lot more than sidekicks.
Definitely. Hey, Riddler here, Bob. He's evolved.
Yeah, Matt, do you think there's more story potential for Riddler as a villain or as a rival detective to Batman?
I like the rival detective thing. And of what I watched of Gotham, they started this way with the Riddler character in that series. He was a forensic technician for the Gotham City Police Department, almost their own little Dexter, but without all the serial killing.
Do you remember if he was in the very first 3 or 4 Gotham episodes?
He was in it from the very beginning.
Okay, because I watched the first 3, and I'm not saying you're wrong because I don't remember them that well, but I watched the first 3 10 years ago, and he just didn't register for me as a character.
He's there. He's not important, though. He's until later on. But I mean, they started doing this sort of thing where he basically plays a part of being one of the detectives on the force, which is fun. It's a different way to look at him, considering all the other versions we've seen of the Riddler in the past.
I think you've made fun of me in the past, and you're not wrong that I really have a thing where I like villains reforming. I find that like really interesting. It's one of the reasons I like the X-Men a lot. I was really excited around this time. This Face to Face is the story that sets this up, this run and the Grant Morrison run up coming out of 1 year later. And I don't know if you remember, but during Face to Face, even though I liked that comic, I was really disappointed that they basically had turned Harvey Dent face, did nothing with him, and then immediately turned him back to Two-Face.
Yeah, they do that all the time. They love to take Harvey and just reform it for a good issue or two, and then he's, oh, I'm going to scar myself back again.
I'm not a moron. I always knew Harvey would eventually go back to being Two-Face, but I just wanted more because I have a lot of nostalgia for like the Batman Gordon Harvey alliance from Long Halloween in year one. I wanted that explored more. It wasn't. And then I remember at the same time, I think I was excited about this, just because I probably even said this to you at the time, although I don't know if you remember that I was excited about this because Dini was fixing the Riddler after Hush broke the Riddler.
I do remember you telling me that, yes.
And but I was also, again,
Because
I'm
I
not
was
a
like,
moron.
really, Bob? Really? Riddler's broken?
And then Matt reread that page at the end of Hush as an adult, and he realized that his old friend Bob had a point.
It took me like 3 hours to read that page.
In the 3 hours it took Matt
You
to
needed
read that page, he had a lot of time to reflect on how his old friend Bob.
you needed all that exposition just to explain the stupid story.
But yeah, I like this gimmick of the Riddler, and I do think you could make the argument that the Riddler is maybe not the most versatile Batman villain, and that people are always struggling with what to do with him. So having him be a rival detective actually, I think maybe does have more story potential than just him as a villain who's pretty similar to Joker.
Well, Bob, let's move on to another villain we are familiar with and we read a lot about in Gotham Knights.
We
Uh,
certainly, her death is not mentioned, and honestly, thank God it's not mentioned. We're talking about issue number 823, Stalked.
like a plant, Bob, get it? Stalk.
Yeah, but also like stalking, like male predatory behavior, Matt, which we see a little bit of it in this comic too.
Yeah, because Poison Ivy experiments with growth serum, which causes Batman to have to quarantine her in the Batcave. And because of all this playing around she's done with the growth serum, she's created this plant-based version of Venom that we now know as Harvest. And I don't think we're ever going to see Harvest again, are we, Bob?
I didn't think about this while reading the comic, but while reading your summary here, it really hit me. Do you think Dini was maybe trying to justify the connection of Poison Ivy and Bane from Batman and Robin?
It's not a far leap. You really do get into these experimental type things with Poison Ivy. This was a retread too of what we saw in Gotham Knights. 'Cause she's got an issue that she has to be quarantined, kept away. It seems like the same sort of story.
Well, Matt, I just also like to point out the difference between 2006 and 2025 because in 2025, if Poison Ivy came up with a plant-based version of Venom, known what we might understand as a plant steroid, she could just go on the Joe Rogan experience and talk about the benefits of her plant steroid. And I'm sure a lot of very credulous people would send her a lot of money to take the plant steroid.
I might take it. Let me like Bane. Don't you want to be like
Matt, Matt,
Bane?
Matt wants to roid. Matt wants to get ripped, but on plants. He wants a green way to get ripped.
Yeah, I want a Greenway to get ripped.
Speaking of opposing green, I'm going to go with my favorite panel of this is from page 50, and we see Ivy firing a machine gun at a plant, which is pretty out of character for Ivy, and I'm going to complain about that a little later in this coverage of this issue, but I just as a visual image, I enjoyed it.
My favorite visual image in this particular issue is on page 67. And it's the final shot of Batman. It's the way he is like stooped over. I like the
Mhm.
way it's drawn. I like the way the cape's draped over him. And I say all that too because most of the imagery in this issue is crazy cheesecake.
I should say the artist for this is Joe Bennett, who is a cheesecake artist. You can have cheesecake art in your comics. It's not always, I think, our cup of tea, but you can have it. But you do have to make a choice. And that's you can have Joe Bennett or Gillum March or whoever do cheesecake art, or you can have the plot be Batman roofie Ivy to take her to the Batcave. But I don't feel like you can have both of those things in the same comic. That's just my take.
It's not a good idea. It's not a good look. And if you do pick up this issue, listeners, it's issue 823. Do not look too closely at Ivy's face, especially in any time she's being restrained by a plant.
Yeah, I also beyond the cheesecake of it all and the softcore porn aesthetics of it all, I did want to say too that this issue basically makes Ivy a motiveless serial killer, and that's pretty lame. I think in its way, this is almost as bad as her being Lois Lane in a love triangle with Man in Hush Returns. That said, this is much better done than Hush Returns. And the idea that Ivy would kill, say, polluters that have a plant digest their bodies, that's a pretty cool idea. That's something Ivy should do.
Ivy's a hard character to write because she's kind of one dimensional with her whole
You
gimmick.
say that, Matt, but we are in the golden age of Poison Ivy comics. We're almost up to 40 issues of the Poison Ivy solo series.
Yeah, but a lot of that's her relationship with other characters, right?
When it came out, I was like, oh, this is the miniseries. And then it got to issue 15, and I was just like, well, surely it won't go on that much longer. I'll just read it when it's canceled. And so I haven't ever actually started reading the comic. I am going to read the comic at some point because it's written by G. Willow Wilson, who I really like. You might know her as the co-creator of Kamala Khan. She also did a really cool graphic novel for Vertigo about 15 years ago called Cairo. But I'm really excited to read a G. Willow Wilson Poison Ivy series, but I'm just holding out till it's finished.
Well, Bob, we may have to give that a read because I'm kind of interested now if we could have a Poison Ivy series going for that long. Because we also have Poison Ivy with her own show with Harley Quinn.
Is effectively the co-lead of that Harley Quinn show.
I guess I'm not giving her enough credit, Bob. She's just a
Although,
plant
but
lady.
you are right. In the Harley Quinn stuff, she is, she's still a supporting character.
Well, Bob, let's move
Well,
on to some
Matt,
other supporting characters in issue 4 titled Night of the Penguin. And in this issue, Bob, Penguin is going legit with the Iceberg Lounge, but he discovers that Z-Man, we call him Z-Man.
Let's call him Z-Man.
It's 3 Z's, but we're just going to call him Z-Man. Z-Man in Little Italy are using the talents of a magician, Art Wiener, to ruin his grand opening. And I want to make sure I use the name Art Wiener because it's going to be important later on, Bob. Not just in this issue.
There actually will be, this will not shock you. Paul Dini also loves magic, Matt, although he more loves stage magic than like supernatural magic. But there's going to be pretty heavy Zatanna appearances in the next set of issues, if I recall correctly.
I wonder why he chose Zatanna.
You've seen pictures of Paul Dini's wife, right?
Yes, Bob.
Yes. Okay. Just making sure. Listeners, if you're not aware, Paul Dini is married to a stage magician who looks a lot like Zatanna.
Well, there you go. All right, Bob. So with this issue, I like this one. You had Zatanna. You did have some magic stuff coming in. Nothing crazy.
Speaking of, what was your favorite panel, Matt?
Yeah, I really like, there's this panel of Zatanna actually reading, propped up, levitating. That would be so relaxing to just be able to float and read at the same time.
Matt, I wanted to hit you with a couple things. My first is we open up in this comic with man-eating seals.
Oh, yeah.
Trying to feed Batman to man-eating seals. I just find it a really funny idea. I'm glad the Penguin has them. And then my favorite panel is page 78. We see Lois Lane in this issue, and she's a really fun guest star in this issue. We see her snooping behind a door, listening in on Penguin and Riddler, and she's trying to ruin Penguin and Riddler from going legit. That's a really interesting story idea. And in general, the idea of Lois interacting with Batman villains besides the Joker is a really interesting idea that I don't think gets explored that often. So I like seeing it here.
It really is, Bob. And is this the first time we're introduced to Z-Man in Little Italy?
As far as I know.
They do make a return a little later on. I have read ahead a bit. And I will say this, Bob, that this is the 3rd issue in the run we've seen so far. We have an Alfred appearance.
You might have a point that Stalk wasn't a very good issue and there was no Alfred. And maybe if Alfred was around, Batman wouldn't be roofing Poison Ivy and bringing her to the Batcave. I'm
kind of wondering if they were embarrassed to bring Alfred down to the Batcave when they had the naked Poison Ivy laying up in their quarantine room in their man cave.
Alfred's a gentleman. He has standards.
You do have Tim Drake squatting over there watching her. Weird issue, folks.
I don't think this was the vibe of the pornography at the time, but in this modern era, it really has stepmother porn vibes.
Yeah. So with that being said, we're going back to the Poison Ivy issue, even though it was probably one of the worst of the bunch.
By far the worst, right?
Not of the Penguin, though. It is what it is, Bob. I mean,
pretty fun.
It's fun.
So, Matt, we're going on to issue 825, Return of Dr. Phosphorus. This is a fill-in issue. It's by Royal McGraw and Marcos Mars. I was looking up them both, and I didn't find that much else they had done that I was familiar with. I did have a question, though. You know what an inventory story is, right?
Not really.
An inventory story is a story that, and they don't do these as much anymore, but it's a story that DC or Marvel will just commission a one-off, or maybe sometimes a two-parter that's like, oh, if we have a gap in the schedule, somebody's running late, or this person, it's a fill-in that might sit on the shelf for a year or two before they use it.
It's substitute lesson plans.
Exactly. But if the substitute lesson plans were written like 2 months in advance with no specific idea of when it'll be used, my question was going to be, did you think this was just a general story that they had commissioned from Royal McGraw and Marcos Mars. When somebody can't do an issue of Detective or Gotham Knights or Batman, will run this? Or do you think it was, oh, Paul Dini and Don Kramer can't do an issue, but Royal McGraw and Marcos Mars can do an issue that's pretty similar in tone, style, theme, and focus to the Paul Dini run?
Y- You pointed this out, but Strange Apparitions, I feel like this is somewhat of an epilogue, like fade,
Yeah, that's a good way
to
to
like
put it.
Strange Apparitions. So I feel like they commissioned them to do that. Like, and then maybe
See,
that's what this
I'm thinking it was more a conscious fill-in because it very much has the same focus of these earlier issues of, okay, let's take a villain and do a spotlight issue on them. But obviously that could describe a lot of issues that, you
right
know,
issue. It's any one shot issue. That's about.
well, not always though. You can do it other ways. To me, it felt more like a conscious fill-in rather than just something that had been sitting in the inventory for a year. What does go down in this issue?
Well, Dr. Phosphorus escapes from Cadmus and seeks revenge on Rupert Thorne, which, like I said, Strange Apparitions.
I was really surprised because Boss Thorne doesn't show up till rather later in the issue in comics in the 90s and the aughts. And like you say, it's a sequel to the Steve Englehart, Marshall Rogers run from the late 70s, famous run with Boss Thorne, Hugo Strange, Dr. Phosphorus. It was collected under the name Strange Apparitions.
Yeah. And then my favorite part, Bob, they really have a really good splash. It's actually several, it's a couple of panels, but there's one really good one of Phosphorus coming forward, and you see he looks like some scary horror monster, like a Scooby Doo villain. But on the splash page, it does make him look somewhat like he could be a cool Batman villain if they tried, which surprises me. Like, I don't think we ever saw Dr. Phosphorus in the animated series, but we do get Blight in Batman Beyond, who has like the same design.
I wonder, we've talked about this on air before, and I'm not sure if this is true. This is just speculation secondhand, but I've often complained about how like Batman in the 70s and Batman in the early 80s is not well collected by DC. And that's also true of my beloved Legion of Superheroes. It's not well collected. And it's been speculated that the way the contracts are written for material in the 70s and the early 80s, the level of royalties might make it allegedly prohibitively expensive to reprint that stuff, which I am somewhat skeptical of. But if that is true, I do wonder if maybe there's something similar going on with Dr. Phosphorus, because I think he was created by Englehart and Rogers for that late 70s Strange Apparitions run. So I wonder if it's maybe an issue of not wanting to pay out royalties for the character.
Oh, that makes sense. I've always wondered because some of these characters you think would just be like one-off villains. This would definitely be
Yeah.
one of them.
I like Dr. Phosphorus a lot. He's also, in my impression, he seems to be like a weird character who is a Batman villain, but doesn't show up very much. But Dr. Phosphorus, to me, maybe I'm wrong about this, but to me, he always seems a guy who might show up in some other second string heroes book, or he might show up on the Suicide Squad.
Bob, into that issue, Alfred, we're gonna four Alfreds.
See, Matt, I think I can disprove your Alfred count, though, because we're moving into the last issue, which, as we said before, I think is by far the best issue of these comics, moving into number 826, Sleigh Ride. And Matt, not only is there no Alfred in this comic, there's barely Batman in this comic. And I like
Yeah,
that.
it's just a very Robin Joker centered issue, and I mean that's what happens. Robin is abducted by the Joker, takes him on a car ride.
It's interesting. I think on the first page, we have a little footnote that's saying that this takes place before Batman 655. So Batman 655 is the start of Grant Morrison's Batman and Son arc, which I think actually came out several months before this. I think Detective Comics issue 821 came out around the same time. So it is interesting that all of this, and maybe even all of the next trade, take place before the Morrison run. Damian is not a factor yet. And we could also say, actually, I guess this would depend on when the issues in the next trade take place, but this might be the last Tim Drake story before the introduction of Damian.
Wow, yeah, this would have been a good ending to Tim Drake if they really wanted. Should Joker
Yeah.
blow Tim's brains out in this car, or just keep him here, or should Tim be able to
Yeah,
get out and escape?
we got to clear the decks for Damian. Although, in fairness, I do think Tim had his own solo series at this point.
Yeah, and I will say this, Bob. I mean, this issue I really enjoyed because it reminded me of those early '90s Robin runs where they were really pushing Tim Drake as this new, fresh Robin that was supposed to embody the reader, the younger person who was reading comics
Yeah.
at the time. Oh, I could be Robin.
You'd have miniseries, Cry of the Huntress and Joker's Wild.
That's what I got from the story. It has that same gritty feel to it. I could just imagine Tim Drake getting abducted and having to deal with the Joker being this lunatic, the people that are
Yeah.
dead in the back seat. That was my favorite. By the way, that was my favorite panel is when Tim actually looks behind him and notices there's two dead bodies in the back seat that they've been driving with.
Yeah. There's a few that's a great panel. There's a few panels I want to call out. I think my favorite is just on 94 where Joker just comes out of the car and he's asking Tim, "Sup?" Now, that's a very 2006 gag, but it really hit for me this time too. And I should say Don Kramer did the art on this, and he did the art on the Penguin issue we just talked about, as well as the second issue, the issue. So Kramer really knocks it out of the park. A couple of other pages I liked. We have, and this again, maybe getting a little bit into Dini's fetishes, but we have the Joker having tied Tim up, and it looks like he has Tim with a ball gag, but it turns out that it's an Xmas tree ball. That's on page 98.
I had to go back and look at it. I thought it was a ball gag at first. When I went back to look after the notes, I was like, oh, it is. You're right, Bob. It's an ornament.
I was actually looking for that. I strongly remember reading that at age 21 or whatever and being, did he just draw a ball gag? And then it was a Christmas tree ball. There's a great panel of Tim realizing the dead couple's in the back seat. Later, when Tim and the Joker are fighting, Tim is in the back seat and actually blocks Joker's punch by holding up the corpse of the husband, and the Joker's fist hits the teeth and skins his knuckles of the corpse teeth. Oh, it's gross, but it's a great image.
That is disgusting. All of it takes place in a car. You do have
It's a
Joker
bottle
running
episode.
over people as he's driving. It's very dialogue heavy. You really get a sense of like the fear in Tim, but I feel like Tim always gets in these weird situations that seem way too dangerous for someone his age. Bane and Killer Croc, that fight in Nightfall, that's one of my favorite things. He could have been in a worse predicament.
Tim,
But stops that though, I have to say. Him getting kidnapped by the Joker, especially around Christmas. Come on.
I did want to ask Matt, so you had never read this issue before?
No.
This issue has maybe been collected a couple times because I think I was talking to Noah, and I might be wrong here, but I think he's not read this run before, but he has read this issue.
No, I'm not really, I wasn't really familiar with any of these issues. I recognize some of the art. I think I just remember seeing it, but not really like the actual content of the comics or any of the plots.
We've already said this, but I'll just emphasize Sleigh Ride is definitely my favorite of these. It's the only one I remembered very vividly and very specifically from this trade. And revisiting it, I liked the whole trade as a younger man in my early 20s. I don't dislike this trade, but I would say in hindsight, I think Sleigh Ride is far better than the others.
It's a fun read. It's nothing crazy good, but I am enjoying Denny's writing. I think that, and I do like that each issue is it's one story instead of having to have this long drawn out.
Well,
That may just be biased because we've been reading these long arcs.
yeah, that's true. And we've been reading, it's just nice to only do like 6 issues instead of 12. I also like, both found a lot of things to like about Devin Grayson and Scott Beatty's runs on Gotham Knights. But I mean, I guess it also should be said, Devin Grayson and Scott Beatty, for their virtues and their charms, do make some of the worst decisions in Batman history on those 2 runs. And then we got hit by maybe the worst Batman run of all time, AJ Lieberman. And so to just come up for air from that and just to read, pretty solid, competent, interesting comics, it's just nice.
Yeah, it's nice. So what are we reading next week, Bob?
Oh man, I don't have the issues handy. Sorry, listeners, I've failed you. But if I remember right, the trade paperback is called Death in the City, and it's the next 5 or 6 issues of this
Okay.
comics run. So probably
Awesome.
like 827 to 834 or something like that.
I've read a little bit ahead, Bob, so I'm not going to lie. I'm interested to hear your take on some of the twists.
I've read that collection before, used to own it, but don't. All I remember, I think, is like a Zatanna 2-parter.
Oh, yeah, there's a lot of Zatanna.
Looking forward to hearing your thoughts, Matt. Thanks for joining us, listeners, as we trek on towards the original Hush 3, aka Heart of Hush, which will be the climax of this run. And we'll look forward to seeing you next week.
Thanks for listening.